The girl had grown up with the sound of waves instead of alarm clocks. Every morning before the sun showed its face, she woke to the smell of salt in the air and the quiet creak of wooden boats rocking near the shore. Her home was a small, broken house made of old boards and rusted tin sheets. When the wind blew hard, the walls trembled. But it was the only place she knew as home. She lived with her father, a tired fisherman whose hands were rough from years of pulling nets from the sea. Her mother had died long ago, taken by illness when the girl was still too young to understand what death truly meant. Since then, the sea had been both their blessing and their curse. It fed them, but it also tested them every day. The girl never complained. She walked barefoot on sharp sand, carried heavy baskets of fish, and cleaned the day's catch under the burning sun. Her clothes were old and faded, but always clean. People in the village knew her as quiet, hard-working, and kind. She smiled easily, even when life gave her very little reason to. Every day followed the same routine. Before dawn, she helped her father push their small fishing boat into the water. She watched as he sailed out, praying silently that the sea would be gentle. While he was gone, she waited on the shore, mending torn nets with careful fingers. Sometimes other fisher families gathered nearby, talking about storms, debts, or fish prices. She mostly listened. When her father returned, they sorted the fish together. The best ones were taken to the local market. The rest they kept for themselves or sold cheaply to neighbors. It was never enough money, but it was enough to survive. That was all they hoped for. That morning began like any other, but the air felt heavy. The sky was gray, and the wind whispered warnings through the palm trees. Her father frowned as he looked at the dark clouds in the distance. "We should not go far today," he said quietly. She nodded. She trusted his instincts. The sea had taught him lessons no school ever could. Hours passed and the wind grew stronger. Waves slapped against the shore with more force than usual. The girl stood near the boat, her dress fluttering wildly. She felt uneasy, but stayed calm. Fear was a luxury they could not afford. When her father finally returned, the boat struggled against the rising waves. She ran into the water to help guide it in, her feet sinking into the wet sand. Just as they were about to pull it ashore, a sudden wave crashed hard against the side of the boat. The rope slipped from her hands. She lost her balance. For a moment,
Ow.
Everything felt slow. She heard her father shout her name. She felt the cold water wrap around her legs. Then her foot hit something sharp hidden beneath the surface. Pain shot through her body, and she fell hard onto the rocks. Her head struck the edge of the boat. The world went dark. The storm did not care. Rain began to pour as villagers rushed toward the shore. Someone pulled her from the water. Someone else shouted for help. Her father knelt beside her, his voice shaking as he begged her to wake up. Blood mixed with rain on the sand. The sea kept roaring as if nothing had happened. She did not open her eyes. Far from the village, a luxury yacht had anchored earlier that day, owned by a man who rarely noticed the weather because his life was protected by walls of comfort. He was used to control meetings and quiet rooms far away from the chaos of ordinary lives. But that day, the storm forced him to look outside his world. From the deck, he noticed movement on the distant shore. Through the rain and wind, he saw people gathered, panic clear even from afar. Something about it felt wrong. Without thinking too much, he ordered his crew to take him closer. When he reached the shore, the scene before him was nothing like the polished life he knew. Mud, rain, broken nets, crying voices, and at the center of it all, a young girl lying still, her face pale, her hair soaked and tangled. Her father looked up desperate, not caring who the stranger was. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "Help her." The man hesitated only for a second. He had wealth, influence, and power, but in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was a life slipping away. He ordered his security team to call for medical help immediately. There was no proper hospital nearby, only small clinics not equipped for serious injuries. Without wasting time, he decided to take her to the city. The villagers watched in silence as the girl was carried away, wrapped in a dry coat far too expensive for their world. Her father followed, confused and afraid. stepping into a future he never imagined. As the car drove away from the shore, the storm continued behind them. The village slowly disappeared from view, along with the life the girl had always known. She remained unconscious, unaware that her fall had already changed everything. In the quiet of the moving vehicle, the man glanced at her again. There was nothing special about her clothes or her background. Yet something about her fragile stillness stayed with him. Maybe it was the way her father held her hand, whispering prayers. Or maybe it was the reminder that life could shift in a single second. No matter how rich or poor one was, by the time they reached the city, the rain had stopped. Lights filled the streets, and tall buildings stood proudly against the night sky. The girl was rushed into a private hospital, doors swinging open to a world she had never seen. Machines beeped softly. Doctors spoke quickly. Forms were signed without hesitation. Outside the emergency room, her father sat with his head in his hands, his clothes still wet, his heart heavy with fear. He did not know how he would repay this stranger. He did not even know the man's name. Hours passed like years. Finally, the doctor stepped out and said she was alive, but the next few days would be critical. Her injuries were serious, but she had a strong chance to survive. Relief washed over everyone. The man nodded once quietly. He told the staff to give her the best care possible, then turned to leave. He believed his role in her life was over. He did not know that this was only the beginning. Somewhere between the sound of waves she could no longer hear and the steady beeping of hospital machines, the girl remained asleep. Her fall had taken her far from the shore, to a world of glass walls and soft beds, and when she finally opened her eyes, nothing would ever be the same again. The first thing she felt was silence. Not the soft silence of early mornings by the sea, but a strange, heavy quiet that pressed against her ears. Slowly, other sounds crept in. A steady beeping. Low voices somewhere far away. The faint smell of something clean and sharp that made her throat feel dry. Her eyes tried to open, but they felt too heavy. When they finally did, the light above her was so bright that she winced and turned her face away. Panic rose in her chest. This was not her home. This was not the sound of waves or the smell of fish and salt. She tried to move, but pain shot through her head and down her side. A weak sound escaped her lips. Almost instantly, a nurse appeared beside her bed. The woman spoke gently, telling her to stay calm, telling her she was safe. Safe. The word felt strange. "Where am I?" the girl whispered, her voice dry and thin. "You're in a hospital," the nurse replied softly. "You were brought here after an accident. Try not to move too much." The girl's heart began to race. Memories came back in broken pieces. The storm. The wave. Slipping. Her father's voice calling out to her. "My father," she said, fear filling her eyes. "Where is he?" The nurse smiled reassuringly. "He's here. He hasn't left your side." Tears filled the girl's eyes before she could stop them. She turned her head slowly and saw him sitting on a chair nearby. His face looked older than she remembered. Dark circles rested under his eyes, and his hand shook slightly as he stood up. "She's awake," he whispered, as if afraid the moment would disappear. She tried to smile, but it came out weak. "I'm sorry," she said, not even knowing why. Maybe for worrying him. Maybe for falling. He took her hand carefully, afraid of hurting her. "You don't have to be sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "You scared me. That's all." She wanted to ask how long she had been there, how much this place cost, how they would ever pay for it. But her head felt heavy. Her thoughts slipped away again as sleep pulled her under. When she woke the second time, the room was quieter. Sunlight came through a large window, touching white walls and clean floors. Everything looked too perfect, too expensive. A doctor came in and explained her injuries in simple words. She had hit her head and broken a bone. She was lucky to be alive. She would need rest and time to heal. That was when the question she feared most finally came out. "How much does this cost?" She asked. The doctor paused for a moment, then said gently, "You don't need to worry about that right now." But she did worry. That was how her life had always been. Later that day, she noticed someone standing near the door. A tall man, dressed simply but carrying himself in a way that made the room feel smaller. He did not look like the fisherman she knew or the market sellers she saw every day. His presence was quiet, but strong. Her father noticed him too and quickly stood up. "This is the man who helped you," her father said, his voice full of gratitude. "He brought you here." The girl struggled to sit up. "Thank you," she said quickly. "I don't know how to repay you." The man raised his hand slightly. "There's nothing to repay," he said. His voice was calm, almost distant. Anyone would have done the same. She knew that wasn't true, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded and looked down at the blanket covering her thin body. She suddenly felt embarrassed. Her clothes were gone, replaced by a clean hospital gown. Her hands looked small and rough against the white sheets. "I'll leave you to rest," the man said after a moment. He turned to go, as if this was just another task finished. She watched him leave, something heavy settling in her chest. She didn't know why. Days passed slowly. The hospital food tasted strange, and the bed felt too soft. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. Every detail reminded her that she did not belong there. Her father slept on the chair every night, refusing to go home. Each morning, she tried to act stronger than she felt, not wanting to add to his worry. Sometimes, the man returned. He never stayed long. He asked the doctors questions, nodded, and left again. He rarely spoke to her, but when he did, his words were polite and careful, as if he didn't want to cross an invisible line. She learned from a nurse that he owned the yacht anchored near the coast, that he was very wealthy, the kind of wealthy she had only seen on television, screens and shop windows. The knowledge made her uncomfortable. One afternoon, when her father stepped out to get tea, the man entered the room again. This time, there was no doctor with him, no nurse, just silence. "I hope you're feeling better," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "Thank you for everything." He nodded and stood near the window, looking outside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said suddenly. "If I had known how serious it was, I would have stayed at home." He turned to look at her. "You didn't cause trouble," he said. "Accidents happen." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning inside her. "Why did you help me?" He seemed surprised. He thought for a moment before answering. "I saw people in pain," he said. "I had the ability to help." "That's all," she nodded. But deep inside she felt it wasn't the whole truth. That night, she overheard her father talking quietly with a nurse in the hallway. Words like bills and costs floated into the room. Fear tightened her chest. The next morning, she made a decision. When the man arrived later that day, she gathered her courage. "I want to leave," she said. He frowned slightly. "The doctor said you need more time." "I can heal at home," she insisted. "I don't want to be a burden." For the first time, something changed in his expression. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. She looked at him, surprised by the strength in his voice. "You don't understand," she whispered. "People like me don't stay in places like this." Silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke again, more quietly this time. "Sometimes life puts us where we don't expect to be," he said. "It doesn't mean we don't deserve it." His words stayed with her long after he left. That night, as she stared at the ceiling, she realized something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Hope it scared her more than the storm ever had. Weeks passed slowly, each day stretching into the next. The girl had begun to recover, though her body still ached from the fall. She had learned to navigate the hospital halls with quiet steps, avoiding the curious stares of those who were unused to someone like her being in such a place. Her father had returned to the village to take care of their home and the small fishing business. But he called every day, his voice both comforting and full of worry. The man visited more often now. He did not speak much, but his presence was constant, almost protective. He observed the nurses, the doctors, the routines, and occasionally asked about her progress. At first, she felt uneasy around him. She was not used to anyone looking at her with such attention, not without judgment, not without expectation. One afternoon, as the sun poured golden light into the room, he walked in, holding a small book. He set it gently on the table beside her bed. "I thought you might like this," he said simply. She glanced at it. The cover was plain, but she could see words inside. Curiosity sparked in her chest, mingled with hesitation. "I don't read much," she admitted. "That's okay," he said, a faint smile brushing his lips. "You don't have to. Just try." She took the book, feeling its weight in her hands. She opened it carefully, running her fingers over the pages. Words she had never seen before stared back at her, and she struggled to make sense of them. But the effort mattered. For the first time in her life, she realized that someone cared about what she thought, what she could feel, and not just who she was. Days turned into evenings, and evenings into nights. The girl began to look forward to the visits. Sometimes he would sit silently in the corner reading, letting her see that he was human too. Other times they would talk about small things, the weather, the sound of the waves, the food she liked as a child. These conversations were simple, but they felt like sunlight in a world that had been gray and stormy. One rainy afternoon, as the water drummed against the windows, she found herself telling him about the village, about her father, the old nets, the little market where she sold fish. She spoke of the mornings when the sun would rise over the sea, painting it pink and orange, and how the scent of salt and seaweed was the only perfume she ever knew. She spoke quietly, almost afraid of revealing too much. He listened without interrupting, as if every word mattered, and in his silence, she felt a strange comfort. Someone was hearing her story, really hearing it, without judging, without expecting her to be anything other than herself. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked finally, his voice soft. She paused. "Every day," she admitted. "Even now, lying here, I think about the sea, the boat, my father working under the sun. It's simple, but it's everything I have." He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "I've had my own kind of sea. Not waves or nets, but walls and expectations. Sometimes the view is beautiful, but the freedom isn't real." They shared a quiet moment then, two people from worlds apart, recognizing pieces of themselves in each other. She saw his loneliness, the weight behind his eyes, and he saw her resilience, the strength beneath her quiet demeanor. But not everything was easy. Hospital staff whispered sometimes, not directly to her, but enough for her to hear. Questions about her background, her place here, whether she belonged. She tried to ignore them, tried to focus on healing and learning. But their words lingered. One evening, the man found her sitting by the window, staring at the dark city below. He noticed how her hands fidgeted with the edges of the blanket. "You're thinking too much," he said quietly. "I can't help it," she replied. "I don't belong here. People see it." He knelt beside her chair. "Do you think I care what they think?" he asked. "I don't. I care about you, and whether you heal. That's all that matters." She looked at him, stunned by his honesty. No wealth, no influence, no power could make anyone say something like that so plainly. For the first time, she felt a flicker of trust. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that maybe she could belong. Even for a little while, the days grew warmer, and she began walking short distances in the hospital garden. The smell of flowers was foreign to her, yet comforting. He often accompanied her, not as a guard or a boss, but as a companion. They walked in silence, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching the sky. One afternoon, they encountered a young child, no older than she had been when her mother died, playing with a small wooden toy. The child's laughter reminded her of her own village, her own childhood. She crouched down, smiling, and spoke softly, almost to herself. The man watched quietly from a few steps away. Seeing the softness in her that was rarely shown that evening, he asked, "Do you want to see the city?" Her eyes widened. I don't think I should," she said nervously. "I belong to the sea. This place. It's not for me," he nodded slowly. "I'm not asking to change that. Just to see what's out there. Nothing more." They walked the city streets the next day. She felt every eye on her, every whisper that followed. People were curious, some suspicious, some admiring. But he stayed beside her, steady, silent. She realized that even though she was far from the sea, she felt safer with him than she had in years. As they walked, they began to talk about dreams, not the kind forced upon her by life, but her own. Simple dreams. Seeing the sunrise over the horizon, learning to read fully, helping her father buy a new boat. He listened carefully, never judging. Offering small suggestions but mostly letting her speak, she began to understand something new. That the world was not only the village or the storm or the boat. There were other places, other people, and not all of them were cruel or greedy. Some, like him, were willing to care, even when it seemed unnecessary. Yet, even with this growing connection, fear remained. She worried that people would never accept her, that she was only a guest in this strange, shining world, that no matter how kind he was, it could not erase the differences between them. One evening, sitting in the garden, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she finally asked him the question she had avoided for weeks. "Why do you care so much?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Because sometimes the right thing isn't what people expect. And sometimes the right thing is to care about someone who has no reason to expect it." Her heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a bridge forming between two islands, one of wealth and loneliness, the other of hardship and quiet strength. The connection was delicate, fragile, but undeniable. She began to allow herself to hope not just for recovery, but for something more, something she had never imagined. That perhaps she could belong somewhere beyond the waves, beyond the nets, beyond the pain of the fall. Yet, the world outside the hospital waited with its whispers and judgments. She had to navigate not only her own fears, but the subtle, quiet pressures of a life she had never lived. And as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling once more, she felt it, a strange mixture of fear and excitement, of longing and uncertainty. Her heart was no longer only tied to the sea. It had begun to stretch toward something new, something unknown, something that frightened and thrilled her all at once. The days had grown warmer, and the girl's body had healed enough for her to leave the hospital for short periods. She was not fully confident yet, but each step outside the hospital felt like a small victory. The streets of the city were alive with lights, noise, and a rhythm she had never experienced before. Everything seemed so big, so fast, so overwhelming. The tall buildings, the honking cars, the people hurrying along sidewalks. It was nothing like the calm mornings by the sea. The billionaire continued to accompany her on these trips, though he was careful not to overstep. He never held her hand in public, never spoke in a way that drew attention, but his presence was steady, reassuring. She began to trust it, though fear still lingered like a shadow. Rumors began to surface. Hospital staff whispered. City people noticed the unusual sight of a young, simple girl walking with one of the wealthiest men in the city. Questions followed her everywhere she went. Who was she? Why was she here? What did she want from him? The whispers reached her ears one evening when she tried to enjoy a quiet moment in a small cafe. A group of well-dressed women sitting nearby were speaking just loud enough for her to hear. Who does she think she is? One said, laughing. She's just a girl from nowhere. Doesn't belong in this world, another replied. Her heart sank. Every time she imagined herself fitting in, these words reminded her that she was different, that she was out of place, that maybe she never truly belonged. When the billionaire noticed her distress later, he did not scold or dismiss it. He simply asked her to sit, to breathe, to tell him what was on her mind. And slowly, she poured out her heart. I don't belong here, she said, tears filling her eyes. People see me, and they judge me. They think I want something from you, that I'm pretending to be something I'm not. I'm just me, and that's not enough. He listened silently, his face calm. When she finished, he took her hand gently and looked into her eyes. You don't have to belong anywhere else, he said softly. You only have to be yourself. And to me, that is everything. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let go of the fear, to allow herself to hope. But the world outside was relentless. The whispers continued, spreading even beyond the hospital and the streets they walked. Some of his friends and associates made subtle remarks, questioning why he spent time with a girl from such humble beginnings. Some asked if it was a game, a distraction. Others assumed she was there to take advantage of him. One afternoon, the girl overheard a conversation she could not ignore. Two of his colleagues were speaking in a conference room near the hospital garden where she often walked. "She's a problem waiting to happen," one said. "You can't trust someone like that in his life. Her background, her ignorance, it will create complications." "She's harmless," the other replied, but her voice carried doubt. "Still, her presence raises questions. Public image matters." The girl's chest tightened. She turned away, gripping the railing until her knuckles went white. The fear she had felt since arriving in the city surged back. Maybe they were right. Maybe she did not belong. Maybe she was a mistake. When the billionaire found her later, sitting alone under the shade of a tree in the garden, he did not speak immediately. He waited, understanding that sometimes words were not enough. Finally, she whispered, "Maybe I should just go back. Maybe I don't belong here at all." He knelt beside her. "Do you really think you can decide what belongs and what doesn't, based on whispers and assumptions?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I feel like I'm constantly being watched, judged. I can't be myself. Not here. Not with everyone staring and wondering." He reached out and gently brushed her wet hair from her face. "Then we'll find a way for you to be yourself. Not everyone will understand, but those who matter will. And I will." The girl looked at him, searching his face for doubt, for hesitation. There was none. Only a calm certainty that left her heart both warmed and anxious. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to feel safe. But the fear of leaving, of being rejected, still held her tightly. The next few days were filled with small triumphs and setbacks. They ventured into the city markets, into quiet cafes, into parks. Each time the whispers followed, sometimes direct, sometimes subtle. She noticed how strangers would stare, how waiters would glance with curiosity, how other visitors would murmur among themselves. Yet, in the quiet moments when they were alone, the world outside seemed to disappear. They talked about simple things, books, the sound of rain, the memories of childhood. She shared stories of her village, of her father, of mornings spent untangling nets and watching the waves. He shared stories of his own childhood, the loneliness of wealth, the burden of expectations. She realized that despite their differences, their lives had similarities. Both had experienced loss. Both had known fear and uncertainty. Both had carried burdens that no one else could fully understand. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a bond grew between them. It was quiet, steady, unspoken in many ways. But it was real. It was not defined by wealth or poverty, by whispers or judgment. It existed in the moments when she laughed genuinely, when he listened fully, when they walked side by side without pretense. Yet, the world outside would not let them forget their differences. One afternoon, as they walked along a quiet street, a car pulled up beside them. A man stepped out, sharply dressed, and looked at her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "You don't belong here," he said bluntly. "Do you even understand who you're with?" The girl's heart raced. She felt the old fear creeping back, the voice in her head saying she had no place in this world. The billionaire stepped forward, standing protectively beside her. His voice was calm but firm. "She belongs wherever she chooses to be. And right now, she chooses to be here." The man hesitated, realizing the resolve in the billionaire's tone. He muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving the girl shaken but alive with a strange sense of courage. That evening she confided in him, speaking the words she had been holding inside for days. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that no matter how much you say I belong, the world will never see it. Scared that I'm not enough, that I'll always be judged." Held her hands tightly. "Then let's face the world together. One day, one step at a time. It won't be easy, but you won't be alone." She nodded, a small smile breaking through the tears. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond fear, beyond judgment. A future where she could be herself, where her past did not define her worth, where someone truly cared without condition. And in that moment, as the city lights flickered around them, she realized something powerful. The whispers, the doubts, the judgments, they were not stronger than her courage. They were not stronger than the bond that had begun to grow quietly between two people from different worlds. But even as hope bloomed, a part of her still clung to fear. She knew that the journey ahead would not be simple. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments when doubt would return. Yet, for the first time since her fall, she felt ready to face them. The city outside continued its relentless pace, but inside her heart, something new had begun. A fragile, delicate hope, a spark that promised that maybe, just maybe, the fall that had brought her here could lead to something more than survival. It could lead to belonging, love, and a future she had never dared to imagine. The girl woke to the sound of birds outside the hospital window. The sun was warm on her face, spilling golden light across the white sheets. She stretched slowly, feeling stronger than she had in weeks. The fall, the long nights of healing, and the fear that had gripped her heart seemed farther away now. She still felt it, the weight of the world, but it was lighter, more bearable. The billionaire arrived shortly after, as he had for weeks now. But today, there was a difference. He walked in with a quiet energy, something brighter, more certain. When she saw him, she felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of comfort, nervousness, and anticipation. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "Good morning," she replied, smiling faintly. He held out a hand. "Shall we take a walk?" She nodded, and they stepped into the garden. The flowers were in full bloom, and the air smelled sweet and fresh. Each step she took felt lighter than the day before. She noticed for the first time that she was no longer looking over her shoulder, no longer worried about whispers or judgments. The world outside still existed, but it no longer controlled her as they walked. He asked, "Do you remember the first time you told me about the sea?" She laughed softly, remembering the fear, the longing, and the simple beauty of her village. "I remember," she said. "It feels like a lifetime ago." He smiled. "You've come a long way since then. Not just in healing your body, but in allowing yourself to be seen. To be accepted." She looked down at her hands, still rough from the work she had done all her life, but now lighter, free from the tension of fear. "I didn't know I could be accepted anywhere," she admitted. "I thought the world would always see me as less." "You're never less," he said firmly. "Not here, not anywhere." The words sank deep into her heart, and for the first time, she believed them. She felt a strength she had not known she possessed, courage that came from being seen, from being understood. The days that followed were filled with small joys. She explored the city, not as an outsider, but as someone learning and growing. She laughed freely in cafes, marveled at books she had never read before, and even shared meals with him without feeling out of place. Each moment of acceptance built her confidence. Each step forward erased a little of the fear that had shadowed her since the fall. Yet, life was not without its challenges. People still whispered, still questioned, still doubted. Some of his friends were skeptical, others openly critical. But she had learned not to let their opinions define her. She had learned that belonging was not about approval, but about truth, about being true to herself and trusting those who mattered. One evening, they walked along the river that ran through the city. The water sparkled under the lights, reflecting the night sky. She paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the breeze on her face. "I never thought I'd see a place like this," she said softly. "It's beautiful, but it's so different from home. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever feel like I belong." He stopped and turned to her, his eyes serious but kind. "You belong wherever you choose to be. Belonging is not about where you are, but who stands beside you, and I will stand beside you." Her heart swelled. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. They were not tears of fear, they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. She reached for his hand, and for the first time, she did not hesitate. He took it gently, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Weeks turned into months. She continued to grow stronger, more confident, more certain of herself. Her laughter became easier, her steps lighter. She visited her village with him, and for the first time, the fishermen and neighbors saw her not as the poor girl who had fallen, but as someone who had faced the storm and come out stronger. Her father watched with quiet pride. He saw the strength in her eyes, the joy in her smile, and the respect she commanded from people who had once seemed intimidating. He knew she had found something rare, someone who saw her true value. The billionaire was patient, never rushing, never imposing. He offered guidance, support, and care without expectation. And slowly, their connection deepened into something neither of them had anticipated but both recognized as real. It was built on trust, understanding, and the quiet certainty that they could face the world together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, he turned to her with a soft smile. "You've changed everything," he said. "Not just for yourself, but for me. You've shown me a world beyond walls and wealth, a world I forgot existed. You've reminded me what it means to feel, to hope, to trust." She looked at him, her heart full. "And you've shown me that there's more to life than survival. That love and acceptance can exist even for someone like me." They stood in silence, watching the river flow, feeling the warmth of the evening and the quiet strength of the bond that had grown between them. No words were needed. They understood each other without explanation. In the months that followed, they faced the world together. Whispers and judgments still existed, but they were no longer powerful. The girl had learned that strength came not from wealth, not from approval, but from truth, courage, and the people who truly mattered. And he had learned that love and connection were not defined by social status, but by honesty, respect, and understanding. One morning, she looked out at the sea from the city's edge, feeling the same wind that had once caused her fall. But now she felt grounded, strong, and certain. Her past, her struggles, her fears, they were part of her story, not chains holding her back. The billionaire stood beside her, silently, firmly, as he had always done. She realized that the fall that had brought her into his life had not been an end, but a beginning of trust, love, and a life she had never dared to imagine. As the sun rose, spilling light over the city and the river, she smiled, knowing that she had found her place. Not because the world had accepted her, but because she had chosen to accept herself, and someone had chosen to stand by her side. And in that quiet, perfect moment, she knew that every fear, every doubt, every hardship had led her here, to a place where she was valued, loved, and truly free. Even after months of healing and adjustment, the girl still felt a mix of excitement and nervousness each time she stepped outside. The city had become less intimidating, but it was still a world she was learning to navigate. Each day was a lesson, each encounter a chance to grow stronger, braver, and more certain of herself. She had started spending time in new places, small bookstores, quiet gardens, and art galleries. Each visit opened her mind to experiences she had never known. Colors, smells, and sounds filled her senses in ways the sea never had, and she marveled at it all. Sometimes she would pause and imagine her village far away, the sound of waves and the smell of salt in the air. She realized that both worlds, the simple and the complex, could coexist in her heart. The billionaire continued to support her quietly. He did not rush her into situations she was uncomfortable with, but he encouraged exploration. Sometimes he would walk beside her silently, letting her lead the way. Other times he would suggest a new place to visit. His patience had taught her to trust not just him, but herself. One afternoon surprised her with a visit to a small library tucked in a quiet corner of the city. The walls were lined with books, old and new, and the smell of paper and ink was comforting. He handed her a book with a smile, saying, "Start with this one. No pressure, just for you." She opened the pages slowly, and for the first time reading felt like an adventure rather than a chore. Words came alive, stories unfolded, and she felt a joy she hadn't experienced since she was a child. He watched her quietly, understanding that the joy was not in the book alone, but in seeing her discover something new about herself. Even as her confidence grew, the whispers from the outside world still lingered. Some people assumed she was using him, some questioned her intentions, and others openly criticized their growing closeness. She overheard conversations at cafes and public spaces, and even from strangers who had noticed her accompanying him. Each whisper tested her, challenging the fragile courage she was building one day. After overhearing particularly harsh remarks, she felt a wave of doubt crash over her. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened, and she wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe she did not belong. Maybe all the trust and care were temporary. The old fear of rejection and judgment clawed at her heart. The billionaire noticed her silence and concern. He took her aside to a quiet park, far from the noise and scrutiny of the city. They sat under a large tree, the shade offering a small sanctuary. "You look troubled," he said softly. "Talk to me." She hesitated, then whispered, "I hear what people say. They think I don't belong. They think I'm pretending. I don't know if I can face it all." He took her hand, holding it gently, but firmly. "Listen to me," he said. "They do not define you. You define yourself. Your worth is not in their opinions, but in who you are. And I see you. I know your heart, your courage, your strength." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, to feel the truth of his words deep in her bones. "I'm scared," she admitted. He nodded, understanding completely. Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you face fear even when it's there. And you are brave. Every single day, his words stayed with her long after. That night, she sat by her window, looking at the city lights sparkling below, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt before. Fear still existed, but it was quieter, more manageable. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to keep going despite it. As the weeks passed, she became more comfortable in her surroundings. She learned to enjoy the city without being consumed by its judgments. She found friends among the people she met in her new explorations. People who valued her for who she was, not for her past or her status. She shared her stories, laughed, felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. One evening, they visited a small concert in a park. Music flowed around them, the notes mingling with the gentle breeze. She closed her eyes, letting the sound fill her, feeling alive in a way she hadn't since her life by the sea. He stood beside her, watching, smiling, feeling the same sense of wonder. It was a moment of pure connection, a reminder that life was vast, beautiful, and unpredictable. The girl began to realize that her fall, the accident that had once seemed like the end of her world, had been the start of a new chapter. She had faced danger, fear, and doubt, and emerged stronger. She had found trust, friendship, and the beginnings of love. Her heart had opened to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. She also noticed the changes in him. He had grown softer, more aware, more willing to see the world through her eyes. She saw his laughter more often, noticed his subtle gestures of care, and felt the quiet strength of his protection and understanding. Their bond had deepened beyond words, beyond appearances, into something tangible and real. But life continued to test them. One afternoon, a sudden misunderstanding occurred at a public event. Someone questioned her presence, implying that she was there for personal gain. The words stung, and she felt her confidence waver. The fear of being judged returned, threatening to undo all the progress she had made. He noticed immediately, pulling her aside to a quieter space. "Don't let them diminish you," he said firmly. "Your value is not for them to decide. It's yours, and it's mine to witness." She took a deep breath, letting his words anchor her. For the first time, she felt a clarity she had never known. The world could speak, whisper, judge, but she was no longer powerless. She had a choice in how to respond, how to carry herself. She chose courage. In the months that followed, they faced challenges together. Whispers, judgments, misunderstandings were part of the path they walked. But the girl had grown into a strong, resilient person. She no longer let fear control her. She laughed freely, shared openly, and embraced the new world she had entered. One morning, standing on the balcony of the luxurious building where he lived, she looked out at the city below. The wind caught her hair, and she felt the same thrill she had felt by the sea, only now it was mixed with confidence. Hope and love. He joined her, standing quietly beside her. For a moment, they simply looked out together, the city stretching endlessly before them. "You've come so far," he said softly. "From the shore to this moment, you've grown into someone remarkable." She smiled, feeling a mix of pride, gratitude, and warmth. "I never imagined it would be like this," she admitted. "I never imagined I could feel this strong, this free, this alive." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "And this is only the beginning," he said. "There is still so much to see, to experience, to share. But whatever comes, we face it together." She squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words in her heart. The fall that had once seemed like an end had led her to a life filled with love, courage, and endless possibilities. She realized that belonging was not about where she came from, but about the choices she made, the people she trusted, and the courage she carried within herself. And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across the city, she knew that her journey was far from over. But now she was ready. Ready to face the world, ready to embrace life, ready to love and be loved in return. She had found her place not just beside him, but within herself, strong, free, and unafraid.